who wanted to testify in this meeting but were unable to do so. That date has already been scheduled for January 26th as a per normal course of events. In the event that we did not get through all of the items that we were going to get through today, as you note, we have already started late, so we're going to try to get through as much public testimony as we can today with a continuance on the 26th, if my board members agree. With that in mind, today, we will consider Z0208-21-CP, an application by Northwest Bible Training Center on property approximately 7.7 acres in size and located at 23172 South Bloom Road. The application involves a comprehensive plan amendment for an exception to statewide planning goal 3 for use of the property, including an existing residence and accessory buildings as an addiction recovery farm. Public testimony will be taken this morning. As always, the public is welcome to sign up to testify. For those attending in person, please fill out a green card and give it to Mary if you haven't already, and you will be called on to provide your testimony at the appropriate time. When you are called on, be sure to include your name and area where you live. I would like to remind all participants, including staff, elected officials, and members of the public, Robert's Rules of Order will be followed in this hearing. We welcome your opinions and look forward to your polite participation. The hearing on Z0208-21-CP will proceed as follows. Number one, we will first hear a presentation from Senior Planner Melissa Ahrens and Principal Planner Martha Fritzie. Next, I will open the public hearing for testimony, which is you folks, beginning with the applicant, who will have up to 15 minutes to present. Then any public officials who wish to testify will have 3 minutes each. Next, representatives from the recognized planning community organizations, we like to call them CPOs, and agencies will each have 3 minutes. Finally, others wishing to testify will have 3 minutes each. The board will then deliberate and either render a decision today or set a time to make a decision at a later date. I'm going to ask we put that decision off today. Assisting us in the hearing room today is Clerk Mary Bork, planners Martha Fritzie, Melissa Ahrens, and Assistant County Counsel Nate Boderman. We will now begin the hearing with a legal statement by Nate Boderman, followed by the planning staff's presentation of their report and recommendation. Nate.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners, and good morning to everybody attending here today. Now's the time set for the public hearing related to the previously identified comprehensive plan amendment that was just identified. This is a quasi-judicial land use hearing, which means two important things for those participating here today. First, all the criteria that can be used in reaching a decision have been identified in the staff report. So testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed towards the criteria identified in the staff report or other relevant criteria in the comprehensive plan or other land use regulation that the person believes apply to the decision. So anyone testifying is asked to please direct your testimony to a relevant approval criterion. Second, failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond to an issue may preclude appeal to the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals on that issue. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Once final, these decisions may be appealed to the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals. So at this time, I'll ask the Board of Commissioners to disclose any ex parte contacts, bias, or conflicts of interest that you might have.
I do not have ex parte contact as defined by the strict confines of Oregon law. However, before I took sworn in as chair of this commission, I did visit the site. I think it was December last year.
Prior to the application being filed, I assume. Fair enough.
Before they filed.
Fair enough.
By definition, that is not specified.
Correct.
Nate Boderman, I also have visited the site early last summer before they filed.
Okay. And the site visit in no way compromises your decision to make a fair decision here today? Fair enough. Very good. If anybody wishes to challenge the impartiality of any commissioner, please clearly indicate your intention to do so in any written or oral testimony that you submit here today. So with that, we'll jump right into the staff presentation. I'll turn it over to Martha Fritzie.
This is live. Well, I think We have a PowerPoint presentation that we want to get up.
Can we just share screen and it should go? Is that how we're doing it?
Okay. I mean, I can start while she's doing that. I'm Martha Fritzie, Principal Planner with the county's Planning and Zoning Division. And before Melissa gets into some of the nitty-gritty details about this application, I wanted to just start with a brief general overview of what exactly it is we are looking at today, this strange thing called a goal exception. So as many of you commissioners are aware, but maybe not everyone listening, Oregon's land use structure system is predicated on 19 broad statewide planning goals, 15 of which apply in this county. They range from things like ensuring adequate citizen participation in the land use process to very stringent protections on natural resources, agricultural land, forest land, and an attempt to ensure efficient use of land and urbanization. And so today we're going to be talking primarily about Goal 3, which is agriculture. Goal 3 lands in Clackamas County are those that are zoned exclusive farm use. And under state law, farmland has very strict protections, and state law is very prescriptive about what can and cannot be done on farmland. We're also going to be talking a little bit about Goal 14, which is urbanization. Even though state law is very prescriptive about what can and cannot be done on certain types of land and under certain goals, there is a recognition that sometimes there are unusual circumstances in which either a zone change is warranted or maybe a use should be allowed on a property that wouldn't otherwise be allowed. And in order to be able to do one of those things that is not in compliance with one of the statewide planning goals, the state set up this process called an exception, a goal exception. There's 3 types of goal exceptions. The first 2 really have to do with property that's already developed or committed to other uses, which is not the case here, as you'll see. The third one is called a reasons exception, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Reasons exception is by far the most difficult type of exception to get and most complicated, and it's very technical. And we're going to try to explain a whole lot of very technical things quickly and in an understandable way. The state law is very prescriptive on how you need to analyze what you need to, how you qualify for a reasons exception. And it is difficult. The bar is very high, and it was set up that way on purpose because essentially it would be allowing a use that nobody else is allowed to have on that type of land. And generally speaking, for any reasons exception, for any statewide planning goal, there's 4 main criteria that need to be met. You need to demonstrate generally that there is a need for what you're doing, but not just a need for the use generally, but a need specific to this location, that it is somehow dependent upon the resource and the resource land that it wants to locate on. There needs to be an analysis of alternative areas and a demonstration of why this use could not reasonably locate in another area. And it's not a simple preference, it's that they could not reasonably locate. There needs to be an analysis of potential consequences of locating this use on this particular property, and then compatibility with the surrounding area. And the use needs to be either compatible or be able to be made compatible. And so these are the 4 sort of overarching main criteria that Melissa's going to talk to you about here. And I'm going to, are we getting this PowerPoint?
Are we ready to go?
I'm screen sharing the PowerPoint through Zoom, but it's not up on the screen yet, so.
Yes, my apologies, Chair. The issue is the Zoom room is still struggling, and so what we're going to do is we can print them out, but we can't display it. It's the TV feed you're seeing. We can pause while I print some out and bring them back in so that you can see them.
We might do that, Martha. How integral is the PowerPoint presentation to what you have to tell us today?
Well, it was in the packet. There is a PDF, a copy in the packet.
How long, how many pages is it?
It's 20 slides.
20 slides.
We're going to pause right now. Okay, we've having one trouble after another today with this hearing. How long will it take to print out the package, share it among the folks? commissioners can get their computers from their offices and bring them over, are we able to access it that way?
Yes, you would be able to access it that way.
Okay, we're gonna pause for about 10 minutes. Have staff please print out copies for folks in the audience. Commissioners will go get our devices if we don't have them. I don't have mine here today, so.
Excellent.
We're gonna pause for about 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, apologies.
Are the folks in the back ready to go? They're on?
Can you see that?
Shannon and Mary, are the tech folks on? Thank you. We will now resume. Our technology issue, I believe has been fixed. We have the slideshow up and running. Do we have everybody in the room? She went someplace.
She'll be right back. There she is.
We have this up here because they're talking.
Okay, Martha, are you going to come up and talk through it, or is Melissa?
I was just about to hand it off to Melissa. So
Okay,
I'm
there
gonna
you
take
go.
over.
Okay, let's get this
So
rolling.
this was the slide for Martha's piece, so you can go to
Melissa,
the.
would you please introduce yourself, please, and your title?
Yes. I'm Melissa Ahrens. I'm a senior planner with the planning department, and I've been the main planner working on this application.
Okay.
Melissa, could you pull your mic a little bit closer to you?
Yeah. So if you could go to the next slide for me.
The next, okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Reasons, exceptions, we just kind of glanced by that. Are you going to talk about that, or is this the first slide?
So the reasons exception slide was to support Martha's piece. So I just skipped it because she already gave her presentation. So we're moving on, unless you want me to.
Go, do
okay.
what you need to do, thank you.
So the applicant on this application is Northwest Bible Training Center. They're a division of Mission Teens, which, as we understand it, is a nationwide faith-based operation with 20 locations that operate very similar to this facility here in Clackamas County. As part of figuring out what the proposed use was to try to help the applicants in figuring out the pathway to allow them to continue this use on the property, staff really worked hard to try to figure out what was being proposed. There's a lot of discussion in the application. You'll see that it's like a school, it has elements of a church, it's kind of like maybe farm worker dwelling to some degree. Staff took a kind of a deep dive in all the definitions, regulatory definitions, and then in the applicant's own proposal to try to couch it as something. And we've determined we can't say it's a church, we can't say it's a school, we can't say it's farm worker dwelling. So it's really this unique use. And so we've highlighted elements of that you'll see up on the screen. So if you could click through for me.
Excuse me, gentlemen, what are we doing? I thought it was going to be controlled over here. Now you've come in and you've interrupted. Am I correct on that?
We're correct in that, Chair.
What are you doing?
Getting us signed into Zoom, Chair.
It's correct behind us, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if you could, sorry, go back. Thank you. So it's a residential, long-term, so 8 to 10 month treatment center. They use faith-based treatment methodology. It's for adults, so over 18. There's no children involved in the proposed use. There's no short-term or overnight guests, no large gatherings. There would be 26 staff and residents living together in a dormitory with shared kind of eating and communal facilities. 5 people would be living in an existing dwelling on the property as part of the program. And then there would be passive farming activities included in their program, so beekeeping, gardening, livestock keeping, things like that. You'll see in their application, they've listed all of those materials. And staff would just like to say that we recognize the great benefits of the proposed use, and we've been working hard with the applicant since 2019, I think, to try to figure out a way to approach this to make it work with the applicant. And it's really the exclusive farm use zoning on the property that has limited kind of our ability to process it in a different way, like through a conditional use pathway or a type 2 application. So staff has just wanted to kind of start off our presentation and say that we recognize the benefits of the use. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So like I said, the property is zoned exclusive farm use. It's in the rural Beaver Creek area. It's surrounded by larger farm properties with farming operations going on. It's on prime agricultural soils. It's relatively flat. It's dory, silty clay loam. It has an existing home on the property as well as an accessory building and then farm, kind of like a chicken coop, things like that. Statewide Planning Goal 3 applies to the property, which the intent of Statewide Planning Goal 3 is to protect farming and agriculture. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So the existing home has been on the property since 1910, as far as we can tell. It was remodeled in the 70s. The accessory building, which you'll see up on there, if you could keep going through the presentation, they're outlined in red. It's labeled sanctuary. That's the accessory building where the dormitory is proposed as part of this use on the property. That would be housing 26 people. That was originally permitted as an agriculturally exempt kind of barn building. It was converted to a building permit in 2011, really an accessory shop building for a previous owner, for kind of storage and residential accessory purposes. Staff doesn't have a full understanding of when the improvements were made to get it to its current state. We don't know if it was fully a previous owner or fully Northwest Bible Training Center, but there has been an enforcement case related to improvements made in that accessory building, including addition of a kitchen, living facilities, residential kind of dormitory style bathrooms, things like that. So the current owner bought the property in 2018, and they moved their operation from Portland to the main house on the property and that accessory building. So if you could keep going through. Thank you. So its violation file is up on the screen there. The code enforcement hearing was July 9th, 2020, which I think you guys are aware of already. That kind of ceased their operation or their use of that accessory building, which as far as we know, they were operating in from 2018 to 2020. So you can keep scrolling through. So just as a general background, statewide planning goals really set up the framework for land use in Oregon. Goal 2 establishes the goal exception process. It's how do I do a goal exception? What are the approval criteria? What do I need to submit for that process? Goal 3 protects agricultural land. It's one of the natural resource planning goals. Like there's one for timber, for example. This one's for protection of farmland and agriculture. It helps maintain the economic viability of existing farming operations. It's an important planning goal for the rural areas of Clackamas County where there's farming. Goal 14 has been a kind of a difficult goal in its application since the statewide planning goals were set up, just because there's been confusion about how it applies. When the county was set up, we looked at rural lands and said, what rural lands are more appropriate for farming? What's appropriate for rural residential? And we had to take a Goal 14 exception to set up those rural residential lands. This property was not included in an exception area, rural residential exception area, because of the soil type, its suitability for farming, so it was left exclusive farm use. So today, what we had to do as part of our review on a staff level is look at, is this new proposed use an urban use? Would it require a Goal 14 exception? And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Let's see. So if you could go to the next slide for me, please. So for Goal 14 application, we look for whether it's a rural or urban use. There's no clear definition in state law that we can turn to. So we have to make a case-by-case determination of whether it's urban or rural. Applicable thresholds used in case law were relied upon for staff's determination. Those are in the staff recommendation. The primary factor, just the kind of main one that we lack understanding of in the application materials, we couldn't make a conclusion really on whether or not it would comply, is that the use needs to be limited to the needs of the rural community. So there's no real there's no defining information in the application saying this treatment facility is limited to the needs of the rural population out there, that it's something that they really need and it's appropriate for in its scope for that rural community. The applicant stated in the Planning Commission hearing that that may be the case. They may have some need out there. We don't have information right now in the application to make that determination. What we do understand is that there.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
What information did you not have in the application?
We don't have any facts or any evidence showing that the treatment facility would serve that rural population.
I see.
So a lot of the participants, the staff, the service providers are coming from an urban area out to this rural area. And that's kind of one of those thresholds when you're looking at rural or urban uses. So we would need to make a determination really that it's appropriate for and limited to the needs of the rural community, that it's not kind of bringing urban use out to the rural area. So staff have determined that the proposed use is an urban use, so we've included Goal 14 exception findings as well in the staff recommendation. So both a Goal 3 and a Goal 14 exception were found to be required. If you could go to the next slide, please. State statute forms the bulk of the regulatory framework for goal exceptions. Like Martha said, it sets a really high bar just because these are pretty rare, and they have to be a really special circumstance for staff to be able to recommend approval consistent with state statute. There is a matrix in the board packet that was also given to the Planning Commission that kind of helps you walk through statute. It's very confusing how it's set up in the state. So we've tried our best to uncomplicate it a bit. So that might be helpful if you're kind of wanting to point back to what does the exact statute say, what applies. That's, I think, Exhibit 28 in the packet. If you could go to the next slide, please. So goal exceptions are very complex, like we've talked about already. So staff have kind of distilled all this statute down into 4 categories. Really, this comes from Goal 2, how it's set up. So we'll be kind of walking through A through D here. And again, these are the highlights. It's complicated, so there's a lot more information in the staff recommendation. If you could go to the next slide, please. So the legal requirements of A focus on demonstrating a clear need and reason for the use to be on that specific property. The use needs to be proven to be dependent on the resources on site, so in this case, prime ag land, and be shown to be required on that specific property to function. An example to put this in context is a goal exception that was done for an expansion of a deep water port on the Columbia River on exclusive farm use land. It was required at that location because it was adjacent to river access, so there was for deep water access. So there was no other place it could be located. That was proven to be a very clear and compelling need to be on the property for that Goal 3 exception. In this case, the record indicates that Northwest Bible Training Center, the applicant, has operated successfully in Portland since 1994 in an urban location, not on farmland protected by Goal 3. The applicant has stated in their materials that they now require a rural tax lot between 5 to 10 acres outside the UGB in a fire protection district staffed 24 hours a day. There's been no demonstration of a clear need or reason why they have to be located on this single specific property that would meet the requirements of statute. Based on goal exception statutes and relevant case law, a simple preference for a rural area does not meet the high bar for establishing a need or reason. If you could go to the next slide, please. The requirements of B focus on an alternatives analysis. The submitted application does not meet the requirements of the alternative analysis. Just the list and the breadth of the areas that it requires as part of that analysis were not included in the application materials. The applicant included 3 properties, all zoned RRFF5, a rural residential zone, and concluded that none of the survey results met the applicant's needs. So B, the statute really requires you look at different areas, not just 3 specific properties. So why can't the use go inside of an urban growth boundary? Why can't it be on other rural residential lands? Why can't it be on other resource lands that might be already committed to a non-resource use where this type of goal exception wouldn't be required? So we don't have that analysis as part of the application. Let's see, you can go to the next slide, please. And you can click one more. I think there's, yeah, just leave it like that. Perfect. So the requirements of C focus on potential environmental, economic, and social and energy consequences for the proposed use. The applicant did not meet the requirements of statute for addressing this analysis. Additionally, concerns related to the use's impacts on the area's water table and increased traffic and roadway impacts were raised by adjacent farmers at the Planning Commission meeting, and we don't have information on the record to show that they would meet this statute in terms of not having impacts. If you could go to the next slide, please. The requirements of D center on the proposed use's compatibility with adjacent land uses. In goal exception criteria categories, this is often the easiest to meet. Because it establishes mitigation measures to address incompatibility issues, but we only get here if we can get through A through C. So it's really if you can show there's a need for the use, if you can show there's no other location it can be located, no other property, and you can show you can meet that easy analysis and C we just talked about, then you get here and you can kind of add mitigation measures or conditions to make it compatible. So we weren't really able to get here because we can't meet A through C for this proposed use. And the applicant focused a lot on this in the Planning Commission meeting in their presentation, just saying we already have the existing structures on the property. We're not proposing to expand. We're not proposing a lot of new development that would impact adjacent farming. And from a staff level, we understand that there's no development necessarily proposed here. It's more that they can't get through A through C, and so we're really kind of stuck being able to condition it to become compatible. You can go to the next slide, please. So the Planning Commission meeting, the first meeting was November 8th, 2021. It was continued because it went, I think, over 4 hours with testimony. There was a lot of really compelling testimony from participants of the program, volunteers, that just really kind of underlined the benefits of this use and how wonderful the use is. There was also concern expressed from adjacent farmers, like I already mentioned, about impacts that the kind of attendees of the program, the traffic, just the use of the property in that way was having on their farming operations. And again, like I said, concerns about water and traffic. And a precedent for this rural area, so setting a precedent that other uses like this could potentially be approved in the rural area. The Planning Commission voted 6-2 to go with staff's recommendation of denial of the proposed comprehensive plan amendment for the goal exceptions. You can go to the next slide, please. So really just summarizing, this is in your summary in the packet too. The main concern that the planning commissioners had was just a general inconsistency with the state statute for goal exceptions. There was concern about protection of rural areas and farming, that there could be impacts to farming operations from allowing this proposed use, and the commissioners were concerned about that. There's also just in general confusion and concern about application of RLUIPA for this proposal, just because it includes faith-based treatment and a religious component. And so we have information in your packet. There's a memo that County Council has prepared to kind of help guide. Nate's going to also talk about it next. And then there's also other materials included. There's a comment letter from DLCD with kind of their take on RLUIPA application. And so I will be turning it over to Nate when I'm done to talk more about that. If you could go to the next slide, please. 17 public comment letters were received. There were some in support, some opposed from kind of the surrounding rural area, and then 1,000 friends supported staff's recommendation of denial, as well as DLCD supports staff's recommendation of denial. The community planning organization did not submit a formal recommendation, just minutes from their meeting. And then you can go to the next slide, please. So this is just staff's recommendation. And you can go to the next slide. And this is for Nate. So Nate will take it from here for RLUIPA.
Go ahead, Nate, thank you.
You bet. So you do have a couple summaries in your materials providing you background on RLUIPA, which, as Melissa alluded to on the previous slide, is the Federal Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. I'm going to go ahead and save any discussion of the general background of that law here because there's plenty of that in the written materials that you have. But because RLUIPA was raised by the applicant, I think it would be helpful to frame some of those issues, at least some of the more specific issues that have been brought up in the context
Nate,
of the
can I get you to
application.
talk directly into the microphone? Thank you very much.
You bet. All right, so when it comes to evaluating potential RLUIPA issues, there's a number of issues that frankly leave plenty of room for argument on both sides. We tried to highlight many of those substantive arguments in the memo that we provided, but these are mostly questions around whether an activity should be characterized as religious exercise, for instance, or whether regulation does or does not impose a substantial burden on that religious exercise, whether the government has a compelling interest in imposing the regulation at all. So those are the types of substantive questions that you typically see come up in the RLUIPA context. But again, you see court case after court case that address these types of issues. And again, we did our best to try and get our arms around much of that case law in a way that's hopefully helpful to you as you work through the issues on your end. But those issues aside, what doesn't seem to be particularly controversial for RLUIPA and really subject to any sort of debate is the manner in which the applicant must frame and approach a RLUIPA claim. And based on the way that the law has been drafted, there's a very specific sequence in which RLUIPA questions must be addressed. And so let me give you an example, right? If you think of those decision trees, right, those flow charts that have you work through various questions, decisions to help you arrive at a conclusion, you have, many of these questions that are pertinent to a RLUIPA analysis all laid out in order. So again, for example, you'll probably start by asking, is there religious exercise at issue here at all? If no, then you're probably done because RLUIPA doesn't apply in this context. But if the answer is yes, then you'd ask, is this religious exercise being substantially burdened by some applicable law? Again, if the answer is no, you're probably done unless there's some claim of discrimination or unequal treatment. But if the answer is yes, then you move on to the next question. You ask, does the law that is substantially burdening that religious exercise further a compelling governmental interest? And you progress through the analysis that way. And so the point I'm trying to make is that there's typically a sequence in how you go about analyzing this. And the difficulty we had in evaluating this particular RLUIPA claim is that the arguments didn't follow that structure, that structure in the sequence that I just laid out, right? And initially, I think the applicant probably did make the case that the activities on the property constitute religious exercise. Certainly staff's position that we agree with that. In fact, as Melissa said, I don't think there's any real debate at all on the merits of the use or whether it would be an asset to the community, right? But the analysis then jumps straight to the argument that the county has no compelling governmental interest in enforcing our zoning regulations. And the issue that the courts have been pretty clear about is that the party must first establish that a substantial burden, must establish that substantial burden before the government must reach the question of whether there's a compelling interest in enforcing that regulation. And again, here, it's still unclear to staff the basis from which the applicant is claiming the substantial burden, at least in a way that would rise to a level that would violate RLUIPA. So in the memo, we try to address what we think the argument might be, but courts in the RLUIPA law itself really couldn't be clear that the burden of raising and demonstrating that substantial burden issue lies with the applicant. So that's really where we're having some difficulty on staff's end. So again, there's testimony in the record from our office, there's testimony from the applicant, testimony from the state, really responding to the specific substantive issues around RLUIPA. I suspect we'll probably hear more from the applicant about that here this morning, so perhaps it's most efficient for me just to leave it right there unless you do have specific questions about RLUIPA, or you can ask questions as issues arise through the course of testimony, but I'll just leave it there on kind of general RLUIPA issues for now.
Thank you, Nate Boderman. We've heard a lot of information, and before we go into the testimony, of the folks in the audience. Does any commissioners have any questions or comments at this time?
I do.
Yes, Paul, go ahead.
So I guess I'm going to ask Nate. Nate, so we had the land use presentation and the criteria and some weaknesses there, and you have the Arlupa argument. So my question is, are they mutually exclusive? In essence, if they don't meet any of the land use stuff, does the Arlupa thing give him the door or them the door to walk through to say, despite all of that,
Yeah.
we can still move forward?
Yeah, potentially, and that's the way it's set up, is that if you find that there's a substantial burden, which is kind of the context in which we're dealing with RLUIPA in this application, if you find there is a substantial burden and the government doesn't have a compelling governmental interest, then RLUIPA could act to preempt state and local law. So
Okay.
that would be the path there.
Great, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? We will now hear from the applicant in this case. You may come forward and present your information. I also have a handful of cards here, but I do not see the word applicant on here. And please introduce yourself.
Good morning, Les Poole. I have been assisting these folks in the application. And a quick question.
May I interrupt you?
You bet.
Les, just a point of clarification. I know you're not an attorney.
Right.
Does the applicant have an attorney in the room who would like to speak on this?
Yes, Chair.
Yes.
Okay, the one that we have, he can come up to, and then do the property owners or key principal owners wish to testify as well? Okay, good. Please, sir, sit down, and we'll have you come up after Mr. Poole. Thank you. Please continue.
Thank you. Les Poole, I'm going to read something to you here to keep it very succinct. This has been quite an adventure, to say the least, and it's challenged the staff, it's challenged me, and the biggest challenge has been to the applicant, who unknowingly moved to the property and discovered that while the activities they're engaging in are all allowed, and they have virtually no impacts in terms of traffic and some of the other concerns that were raised by the staff, legally, under the current Oregon land use plan, they're not zoned to be there. And I'll just read this into the record. I want to make it clear that while I've got a lot of experience, I'm a planning commissioner in Gladstone. You folks see me here regularly, but I'm here strictly as a citizen who is assisting these folks. I'm not here representing anyone else, and I'm certainly not an attorney. When I first visited the site, I received a phone call from a friend who said they had a land use problem, and I assumed the worst. I believe the staff did the same thing. But when I drove out there, I was stunned to discover that it was a neat, tidy operation, modern buildings, nice setbacks. It was on a very unique flag lot. The size and the location of the property were ideal for what they were doing. It was far enough away from town, but close enough, if I could describe it that way. And seeking permanency, it was outside the growth boundary. They provide a unique applicant where participants live and recover on the farm for a minimum of 7 months. It's a voluntary program, which means not everyone qualifies. This is not a punitive or a correctional facility or a clinic in the conventional sense. In fact, in the time they've been there, the police have never been called. The neighbor that lives below has testified that these folks are quieter and better neighbors than she's had in the past. All of the staff are volunteers. They live on site. We would be willing to do additional traffic studies, but one of the individuals, one of the residents, has a number of duties, and one of which is he tracks all of the visits. During 1 week here, a couple of weeks ago, they had 24 vehicles, 24 trips. So concerns about traffic or impacts, negative impacts on farming or neighboring properties, there's no credence in those arguments, none whatsoever. And early in the slideshow, the proposed use was accurately described as a faith-based, long-term, free of charge, residential addiction recovery treatment for adults. But it doesn't say farm, it doesn't say property, it doesn't describe or reference the farming and the rural aspect that is incorporated into their current curriculum. They're a 501c3 nonprofit, and they changed their curriculum and moved to Clackamas County in response to growing negative impacts on its mission. The increased availability of legal drugs, legal opioids, illegal drugs, alcohol, gambling, etc. in the Portland area, along with the growing homeless problem that was landing on their front porch. Homeless people were sleeping in the yard that had no connection to the facility. And it predicated the need for a move and a change in their curriculum. And looking in Multnomah County, inside the growth boundary, they didn't find anything that was really practical or that would provide permanency. And the obvious direction for them was Clackamas County. And they specifically moved to this property because it was ideal for the use, perfectly located, and very, very quiet and private. To receive an approval, the applicant must provide reasons why the use can't be duplicated elsewhere without a substantial burden, and that the use serves the area. It certainly does. We heard earlier that the teachers or the staff are coming in from around other areas. There's implications that there's a lot of traffic or activity that truly does not take place there.
Chair, I just allowed 5 minutes for Mr. Poole. They have up to 15 minutes, but I believe that that's for
Yeah,
everybody who's
and-
going
Yeah.
to speak.
Thank you, Mary. At my discretion, we will allow the applicants to fully present the materials, but all of you, Les, you please need to wrap it up and be brief.
Certainly, and I understand we have 15 minutes total.
We have other people that,
You bet. Regarding the use, when one starts looking for alternatives or comparable properties, one finds extremely limited options. And it would be impractical, and we have made it very clear that while there are other properties out there, very few of them meet the size and the criteria that these folks need. There's considerable confusion about Goal 14, and it's been a sticking point, as was indicated earlier. I'd like to make a couple of comments about that.
please be brief, Mr. Poole.
Sure.
You have an attorney that I believe can present on Goal 14.
When I look at the EESC analysis, the question is, would the proposed use have environmental, economic, energy consequences, social consequences, more adverse than what would occur on non-prime agricultural land or rural residential land? The answer is no. And the reason the answer is no is that the social benefits, when weighed against the environmental and the other factors, it's glaring. In other words, the consequences of their use are not necessarily negative. The consequences of their use are positive. And furthermore, they are not incompatible in any way.
Okay, Mr. Poole, I want to thank you for your presentation today. We're
Thank
going
you
to
for-
move on and hear from the owner's principals, but first, the attorney, please come forward, state your name, your title, and your residence.
Chair, how long would you like?
Just let him go. We're not going to run the clock specifically. I will keep track here. I want to give the applicants a full opportunity to present their case today. Please sit down.
All right.
Thank you, Your Honor. My name is Ray Hackey. I'm an attorney with the Pacific Justice Institute. We're a nonprofit law firm devoted to defending religious liberty, and we represent the Northwest Bible Training Center, also known as Mission Teens, Inc. I'm here today primarily to talk about RLUPA, the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. I know Nate, whose last name escapes me at the moment. Borderman. He spoke a little bit about that, and I don't know what he said in the materials that he provided to you. I would love to see them so that I could address them directly.
I'm sure he'll be provided those to you.
Okay. However, one of the things that Mr. Broderman did not address is RLUPA's equal terms provision. RLUPA says no government shall impose or implement a land use regulation in a manner that treats a religious assembly or institution on less than equal terms with a non-religious assembly or institution. A government violates the equal terms provision when the religious institution is treated on a less than equal basis with a secular comparator, and this is key here, similarly situated with respect to an accepted zoning criteria. Now, I'm fairly certain that farming is an accepted zoning criteria in areas that are zoned for exclusive farm use, including areas that are considered high-value farmland, and that is what Northwest Bible Training Center does. They are a faith-based recovery farm. That's how they define themselves. Now, that might seem a little bit odd to some people. It certainly did to some of the people on the Planning Commission. However, farming is the tool that they use to kind of instill Christian principles, which, there are organizations that use sports to instill Christian principles. There are theater troupes that use the dramatic arts as a vehicle to instill Christian principles and to teach them. They use farming. That's what they do. And, one of the things, because one of the things that Mr. Broderman mentioned is, the question of whether this is a religious exercise. Well, I refer you to 42 USC, section 2000 CC-57A, which defines religious exercise to include any exercise of religion, whether or not compelled by or central to a system of belief. Now, I should mention that in our meeting with the Planning Commission, one individual said, he grew up on a farm, nothing about it is religious. If they want discipline, they can get a service dog. Okay, that's a highly discriminatory comment, and RLUPA was enacted to, counter that very thing. So the exercise of religion as defined in RLUPA is, it covers what they're doing. It's very broad, and it's got to be defined to the maximum extent permitted under both the United States Constitution as well as RLUPA itself. Now, I'll move on to the issue of substantial burden. Now, there's a couple of things there are two cases. Ms. Ahrens mentioned that they looked at case law, which is fantastic. But there are two cases that are very much controlling in the Ninth Circuit, which covers Oregon. And they are both favorable to Northwest Bible Training Center. The first of those is International Church of the Foursquare Gospel, which is versus City of San Leandro. And that speaks directly to the decision of what constitutes a substantial burden. So I had it keyed up on my phone. I'm looking for it now. I'll try to find it relatively quickly. But one of the things it says here, and I quote, when the religious institution has no ready alternatives, or where the alternatives require substantial delay, uncertainty, and expense, a complete denial of the religious institution's application might be indicative of a substantial burden. So in other words, if their application is denied, a substantial burden will be placed on the exercise of religion. There's a reason why Northwest Bible Training Center is operating where it is currently. I know Ms. Ahrens said that they were doing just fine in Portland. Well, I don't know how religious any of you are, but I'm sure all of you have heard the Lord's Prayer. The Lord's Prayer says, lead us not into temptation. Okay, temptation very literally came to their doorstep. They had a marijuana dispensary open, I believe, right next door. They had a bar open across the street. Okay, so for people who are in recovery, who are actively trying to get away from addiction, this is temptation's right there. It's easy for them to stumble. It's easy for them to fall. They move to a place where that's far enough away where they're not dealing with those temptations. It's not on their doorstep. They're out, and like anybody else, religious organizations' needs evolve. So it may have worked in the city from 1984 to 2018, which is when they moved out there. But it wasn't. But come 2018, it wasn't working anymore. Their needs evolved. They changed. That's why they moved out to that site. The other key case that that I really feel you should pay attention to is called Guru Nanak Sikh Society versus County of Sutter. Okay, and in that case, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, who, like I said, whose decisions are binding upon the state of Oregon and its member counties, declared that there is no compelling interest in preserving farmland, that I'm fairly certain applies to even what Oregon has deemed high-value farmland for farm use. So, if you're going
Could
to
you cite that case again? I didn't hear you.
okay, it's Guru.
Spell it.
Guru. Nanak. Sikh. Sikh. Society.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead and
Okay.
continue.
Do you want the case citation number?
No, just for him.
Okay. And then so basically it recognized that there is no compelling interest in just, preserving farmland for farming. And, I understand that, if the county, religious organizations are entitled to property tax exemptions. And so, if ever, that case also, or the International Church of the Foursquare Gospel case, which I mentioned, says that if revenue generation were a compelling state interest, municipalities could include all religious institutions from their cities. And that seems to be what Goal 3 is attempting to do. Now, going back to the equal terms requirement, okay, I will readily acknowledge, as I think the folks at NW, at Northwest Bible Training Center do, that they don't necessarily fit neatly within a lot of categories. However, if you look at ORS 215.283, they bear a lot of resemblance, a strong resemblance to a number of uses which are allowed in farmland. One of those is a church. Northwest Bible Northwest Bible Training Center uses its property like a church. They are not a church. I want to be clear on that. Absolutely, they are not a church, but they use it similarly because they do conduct Bible studies on the property. They up until it got shut down. They did have a sanctuary where they had services, held worship, conducted Bible studies out there and that sort of thing. And they do use it to carry out a religious mission. So it resembles a church in that regard. It's like a school. Schools are permitted in areas that are set aside for exclusive farm use, and anything that involves an ORS 215.283 subsection 2AA permits private elementary and secondary schools to have all buildings essential to the operation of a school. And such buildings may include dormitories or other sleeping quarters, which are commonly found at boarding schools in rural communities. And boarding schools are permitted in such lands. I refer you to the case of Kirpal, Kirpal, Light Satsang, Satsang, versus Douglas County, which is a case from the Oregon Court of Appeals, and that upheld their petitioner's right to construct a boarding school in a farm forest zone. Now, I mentioned that the relevant zoning criteria is farming. That is what they do. Farms, larger ones in particular, frequently have bunkhouses for the laborers they employ. And so the dormitories that they wish to build on their site, and which are technically already there, they just can't use them. They just need to get the permits and all of that. And, that's for the people who are working the farm and using that to learn things, whether they're raising chickens, whether they're, producing vegetables or other crops. And these vegetables or other crops too, this goes into the Christian principle of charity. They give it to, organizations that, help feed the hungry here in Clackamas County. So that's loving your neighbor, helping the poor. Things that are at the heart of the Christian faith. So those are the key, points. And I should mention too that, ORS 215.283 does allow places for drug and alcohol residents. I mean, granted, they allow smaller ones, so theirs is a little bit bigger than what is normally allowed, but, like I said, it doesn't fit neatly. And so those are the key points
Okay.
of law that allow them to do what they're doing in the location where they're at.
Are you prepared to address Goal 14?
Goal 14 concerns urbanization, right? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Does it?
Correct.
Okay, so urbanization, if we go back to ORS 215.283, okay, if you look at the uses, the way that they're using the property, all of these uses are allowed in rural areas that are set aside for exclusive farm use, okay? It is not exclusively an urban type of thing, okay? They may have relocated from an urban location, but that's because, the urban location no longer suited their needs. In fact, it was actually detrimental to their organizational mission, which is to help those who have suffered addiction to drugs, alcohol, and possibly other things to, recover. At this time of year, we sing the Christmas carol, God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen, which, talks about how Christ came to earth to save us all from Satan's power when we were gone astray. Well, that's what they're doing. They're helping to save people from Satan's power when they were gone astray. And so they moved to an urban, to a rural location from an urban location because it was much easier to do that out there than it is, with weed and alcohol and pretty much anything else right on their doorstep. So the uses that they are allowed, like I said, they are similar to a school, which is allowed in areas zoned for exclusive farm use. They are like a residential care or treatment center, which is allowed in areas presuming farm use. They are like a church, which is allowed in areas zoned for exclusive farm use. And they are, in fact, a farm, which I'm fairly certain is allowed in areas zoned for exclusive farm use.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Hackey. Nate Moderman, a point of order. Do you want to address any of the arguments he presented now, or do you want to do that later?
Can I just note a couple things? I
Yes,
guess first and
absolutely.
foremost, so the materials that we submitted into the record for the board were provided with the staff report, were provided with the application materials, and so that was all made available online last week, and so you can look online. And so that's all public record, but it is in the form of a memo from our office. Just to clarify, too, that at least from staff's perspective, we agree that this is religious exercise. And so there's no question, we don't dispute that this is religious exercise, agree with that part, and that RLUIPA does apply. So no issue there. I'll note that we didn't address the equal terms argument that Mr. Hackey brings up now because this is the first time we're hearing about it, the first time it's been raised. And so
First time what has been raised?
the first time that the equal terms prong of the RLUIPA statute has been raised. And so those magic words, if you will, weren't apparent to us in the application materials.
Is that in the ORS?
No, that's a federal law. And so, again, we touch on it in the memo, but I just want to note that, we can do that analysis. But I guess I'll just say, as an initial matter, the equal terms prong of RLUIPA, as Mr. Hackey described, really it doesn't allow the government to differentiate between secular and non-secular uses. And I think in this case, it's fair to say that staff's recommendation of denial is not based on, it has nothing to do with the fact that they are associated with a religious institution. Right. If the same type of use came in and was, was run by a secular organization, the analysis and the conclusion from staff would have been the same. So I'll just note that. And then finally, there's two cases he cited from the Ninth Circuit. We do discuss both in our materials. The two Ninth Circuit cases that he brought up, one was the Guru Nanak case, page 3, and an extensive footnote on page 4 of our memo. We do touch on that. And then the International Church of the Foursquare Gospel, that's the last thing that we discuss. We put it under its own heading and dedicate almost a page to our reading. In a sense, we disagree on the characterization of the holding in those cases, but you can look at the cases, you can look at our analysis, and that's what we've offered.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to point your attention to where you can find the equal terms provision. It's at 42 USC section 2000 CC subsection B1. I just wanted to give that to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nate. Have you concluded your testimony today, Mr. Hackey?
Yes, Your Honor.
I'm Chair, thank you. I'm not an
Yes,
honor.
Madam Chair.
Yeah, great. You know, I appreciate you coming forward today. Now we're going to move on and hear from the principals of this organization. Thank you very much.
Good morning.
And state your name, residence, please, and your reason for being here.
My name is Chris Pervetti. I'm a director at Northwest Bible Training Center. I've been there since 2015. And I just want to talk about, I'm aware and we can all agree that this is a unique situation. But that's the reason exceptions are there, right? The exception process is there for unique situations. You're going to hear a lot of testimonies today from the people in the back, the miracles that have happened there, the lives that are changed. But also the four qualifications that need to be met, the need for it to be at that property, the other comparable land areas that will not work for us. The urban area did not work. Plopping us down in the middle of a residential neighborhood would not be appropriate. And also the EESE, I mean, there are no impacts, but with county approval, we could always provide a more detailed EESE. Traffic studies, I talked to, I think, Christian Snuffin at the county and was told, not even necessary for how many people I have coming and going. 4 trips a day, you don't do traffic studies for that. When it comes to water, we're using way less than an actual farm, like that would be using all that acreage would use. But one thing I wanted to share was that, in my research for this, I saw that Oregon ranked 4th highest in addiction and homelessness, and we ranked 50th in addiction services. We're part of that solution, and sometimes modern problems require like a unique going out on a limb and a unique solution. So, I mean, it costs $8,000 a month to house someone in a rehab around here. We're doing this at no charge to the county. We need to know that there's so many benefits, and we're putting this on a scale, right? The amount that we're saving the county, we have to look, we're not doing anything crazy or out of the box. The surrounding use is so similar. Our neighbors like us, and that's a miracle in itself. You're not going to find that everywhere, putting us just in a random spot. I've had neighbors come and speak for us. We take care of their animals. It's a great relationship. Totally free and supported by churches and people who love what we do. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a paid-off $1 million property. There's a love for what we do, and you're going to get to hear it. And it's changed my life. As for rural or urban use, most of our teachers come from the rural area. You're going to hear from some people who have family members here that are from Malala and rural areas. Yeah, it's not exclusive to that. And even if someone who is homeless in Oregon City is coming into our program, that doesn't mean they're from Oregon City or from an urban area. We're not drawing in people from urban areas. There's just as much a need for addiction services and for God, really, in the rural community as there is in the city. Addiction doesn't discriminate like that. But no, I'm going to keep it short. This place has saved my life.
I appreciate your testimony.
All right.
Is there anybody else
My
on the
co-director,
applicant who
Susan,
wants,
is gonna share
please
real
come
quick.
forward. State your name, your area of residence, and what your association is.
My name is Susan Campbell, and I'm the co-director with Chris Pervetti at Northwest Bible Training Center, and I live at 23172 South Bloom Road. So Chris and I were both staff members when we took over administration in July of 2019. I've been affiliated with Mission Teens since 2014. So we took over shortly after the land use issue arose. This has been our main focus since then, but it slowed down because of COVID, wildfires, and ice storms. I'm not a realtor, but I personally have looked for some other comparable property that we could move to. I haven't found any. I reached out to a real estate broker. She couldn't as well. But there's 2 questions that I want to bring up, and I want to answer because I feel that you should know the answer to, and that is, why are we fighting so hard to stay here? Why haven't we given up? We own that property free and clear. We don't owe a penny of that property. So I'm going to talk today about things that are on my heart, and why, and I hope that these, over the next couple of minutes, these questions are answered. I am an example of someone who needed to be away from temptation and growing drug problem. When we moved to Beaver Creek, we were able to remove ourselves from the growing threats of the urban areas. When we talk about drug addicts and alcoholics and homeless, we are talking about people. Me. Someone's father, someone's mother, someone's brother, sister, uncle, aunt, or someone who doesn't have anybody. We can be helped by collecting chicken eggs and feeding goats and planting vegetables. Feeling useful instead of a menace to society and to our families is, that feeling can't be, I can't explain that feeling. But finishing the day and looking at a sunset in the country, there's nothing like it. For the first time in over 30 years, my family has hope and peace knowing where I'm at and that I'm getting better each day. To this day, they are amazed at the progress that I have made. I'm part of the family again. I was one of those people, and I know how this property helps because it has helped me. I had 36 years of drug and alcohol addiction from 16 to 53. It's not easy making that first step. It caused a lot of anxiety for myself and for most people. The first couple months are crucial, that you separate yourselves from any outside influences. Feeding goats is healthier than being across the street from a bar. When I was in my addiction, I lost everything, including the ability to have children. It was a surprise to me that raising chicks to egg-laying hens would help cure some of that pain from the past, but it did. This is 7.75 acres, and it's huge what it can do. Because of the pandemic, before the pandemic, I was volunteering 2 hours a week at the Clackamas County Jail. Me.
I'm going to have you wrap this up.
Okay. The gals were excited to hear of a place that had animals and farmland and gave them hope that endures today. It's not a place just to leave. It's an 8-month commitment.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we're fighting so hard to stay where we're at.
Thank you very much, Ms. Campbell. I know you want answers, you want this board to answer. However, because of time constraints, I'm going to try to get through as many people here today who have showed up to testify as we can. We're going to continue with that because with the testimony in the room today, any public officials here to testify? I don't see any. CPOs or agencies wish to testify? Raise your hand. I don't see any. Now we will start with the cards from the public. First up is Beth Rogers. Please come forward, state your name, area of residence, and you will have 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
Name is Beth Rogers, live at 23230 South Bloom Road. We live behind the property, and so we have there's a 7-acre non-buildable piece of property between us, and then our property's behind.
And you're a farmer?
Yes, yes. I have nothing negative to say about the teen missions. My concern is the way that it came about. And Chris does say that, he wasn't involved in that, but still, it came about. And so it's like no one's going to take ownership of moving and starting a business out in the farmlands, I mean, did they have blinders on and not know there's permits? That's our concern. And, you know, I'm a person that's not black and white. You know, I don't go into gray land at all. It's either one or the other. And so it's just frustrating. You know, my husband and I might want to start an amusement park out on our 17 acres. You know, should we just do it and then ask for forgiveness afterwards? That's my main concern. In saying about them is we have two sons who are also alcoholics and are in recovery. So there's nothing negative I can say about this this business. So the back fence line that this property backs up to is at 7 non-buildable acres. And that 7 non-buildable acres has people living on it from Portland. They built recently 3 greenhouses, and they are farming marijuana. So my concern is, did anybody vet this? Because it's right on their fence line. And so for them to say that they moved out of an urban area to get away from that, it's in their backyard. We sit on our front porch, we've lived there 34 years, and we've watched this happen, and we have questions on if it stops at marijuana. Also, just a statement, and I'm not sure if this will be allowed. When you made that trip out to the land to look at it, recently a neighbor went and talked to Chris and voiced concern and told him, and very honestly and transparently, that he was going to fight it. Chris told him, "Oh, I'm not worried. I have them in my back pocket."
Thank you very much. Your 3 minutes are up. Nobody has anybody in their back pocket. You're not going to get very far if you make that accusation today. Up next, Al Scott. Come forward, state your name and address, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Al Scott. I live at 2107 Southeast Waldron Road, Milwaukee. And I've lived in the neighborhood of Oak Grove and worked in the Oak Grove area for almost 35 years. And I was very involved in the Neighborhood Livability Project with DA Bill Stewart, Paul Savage, you may remember the neighborhood. I saw the drug use, homeless, 3 doors down from my business, which we'd built. And I saw the ravages right across from New Urban High School, drug selling, one of the largest drug houses at that time there. Homeless people sleeping in New Urban underneath the eaves of the school that the secretaries had to go through. So drug use has no borders, whether it be rural, whether it be city or urban, but things have to be done. You know, if you look around at all your neighbors, there's probably a big elephant in the room, but it's not a big elephant back behind us. You'll know somebody that's had drug use, alcohol use. My mother was an alcoholic. I lost one of my best friends 15 years ago. He was at the age of 50, drug overdose in Oak Grove. Now, if he'd have been able to be involved in an outreach such as what we're speaking about today out in the rural, my old best friend may still be alive today. But you know what? He's not. And so when we look at what can we do today, it's trying to make an exception or a variance to what's out there. It's easier to me to treat people in a rural society, rural area, than it is the urban area. I've counted, we've got a little beach house in Rockaway. There's 3 pot shops in the city of Rockaway, 1,200 residents. Look at Oak Grove, look at Clackamas County, how many pot shops there are. It's ridiculous. But as far as the elephant in the room is there, and teen missions, mission teens, they're saving the county, thousands of dollars the government uses. I put my dollars where my mouth is. I've never actually been out there, but I have been supporting them financially for, probably 6 months or so. because I know the impact that they're making. I got a recent newsletter. There was a 65-year-old and I believe it was 69-year-old, may have been older 60s. They were being helped there. It's not just teens. There's another ministry like Teen Challenge, which helps drug rehabs. It's not teens. It's much more. It's rehabbing people's lives, changing lives. And we have an opportunity to help change lives or ruin or destroy lives. And I vote to change lives, to restore lives. And I hope you as county commissioners can try to make a decision to make an exception to variance to change lives for the positive. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next is Ed Grant. Please come forward, state your name.
Ed Grant did have to leave because he had a meeting. Excuse me.
Okay, Ed Grant will come over here. Next up, Angel Stempert. Please come forward, state your name, address, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name's Angel Stempert. I reside in Southwest Portland. I am a graduate of Northwest Bible Training Center, and my husband and I actually are still very much involved and go about once a month and help lead a worship service there and just support the residents. And you know, there are many pathways to recovery, and there's not one way that works for each individual person. Some people use service animals, some people use AA or NA, some people use exercise, and some people, like we're doing at Northwest Bible Training Center, use farming and need Jesus to change their lives for the better, and that's what I needed. I needed Jesus. I struggled with drugs and alcohol for over 14 years and even fell into prostitution. I didn't have any money, and I didn't think I would ever find help because it costs thousands and thousands of dollars to get into most treatment facilities. I not only chose Northwest Bible Training Center because it was free, but I chose it because I knew I needed to do something drastically different than what I was doing. To be able to completely remove myself from the distractions of the city and what I was involved with was what I needed to get and stay sober. Because of Northwest Bible Training Center and the tools they use to help people who struggle with substance use disorders, I am now able to live my life abundantly and full of purpose and have a relationship with Jesus Christ that sustains me. I now live a life knowing that because of my relationship with Jesus, I am always in the presence of love from him. I know in my heart that I wouldn't be alive today if it weren't for Northwest Bible Training Center and the program they have put in place to help others like me. I was able to learn how to be responsible, I was able to find and create structure in my life, and I was able to create healthy habits in my life that no longer included drugs and alcohol. I have made lifelong friendships at Northwest Bible Training Center, and I'm the happiest I've ever been in my life. And I even identify them as a part of my family. When I left, I was compelled to go back to school, and I'm now in grad school getting my master's to be a school counselor and actually work at the only recovery high school in Oregon called Harmony Academy, and can now say that I am happy and a successful person because I separated myself from the community I was living in and went to a place far away from the city to focus on myself and the love I have for Jesus and other people. You know, this place runs on donations, and there are people who have supported this place for over a decade consistently. And there are hundreds more who support what Northwest Bible Training Center and Mission Teens stands for and how they have impacted their families in such a transformational way. That just shows that this place is not a hindrance to the community out in Beaver Creek, but a blessing and advantage. It doesn't matter where you are in Oregon, there are hundreds, if not thousands of people who struggle with substance use disorders right in the homes in our own neighborhoods. But Northwest Bible Training Center is here to assist and support people in times of hardship and distress, not to be an impediment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Up next, Daniel McGuigan. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Please come forward, state your name, area of residence, and sir, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Daniel McGuigan. I am the current resident director at Northwest Bible Training Center. I am also the director in charge of the maintenance and care of the buildings, the property, the animals, the vehicles. I've worked a lot of farms the last 18 years of my life, and this particular property gives me the opportunity to have a purpose. I graduated, I've been with the center for 4 years now, coming up on, and the only skills I've ever had were blue collar. I turn wrenches, I farm, and that's all I know. Here with this property, I have a nice large pole barn where we took a 46 farm all tractor that came in, jammed, stuck up, didn't run, And I've put over a year of my time into this tractor, teaching other guys around me how to turn wrenches, giving them some skills and opportunities that they may not have had. Learning how to change the hay in the goat pens or keep the chicken coops clean, and at times, of course, there's times to take chickens out. And we've had the opportunity to grow a few sets of chicks come up. And these guys are starting to learn things and starting to learn biblical principles. To go out into our 20 by 60 greenhouse or even into the garden itself, these guys get to plant a seed. And Jesus talked all in parables and mostly about farming if you take a look back through the Gospels. That was relatable to them at the time. And he talked about putting the seed in the ground and watching it die before it grows. And these guys get to see what they put in the ground, come back up. Our greenhouse is year-round. It's not something that only works in the summer and during the winter we have to find other stuff to do. It just doesn't work like that. This property has been instrumental in my life. When I came in, I had just gone through my third divorce. Everything in my life I touched, I wrecked. And there's no doubt about that. So when I came in, all I wanted to do was die. That was it. There was no hope, no future, no purpose for a 44-year-old man to come in. And Mission Teens turned that around. Jesus Christ came into my heart. He changed the way I thought. He showed me that I still have some purpose and that I can turn it around and give it to the guys that are coming up under me. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much. Up next is Rose Brown Antunes, and please state your name, address, and you have 3 minutes. Folks, I have several cards here. I don't think we're going to get through all those today by the noon hour. So we will have to come back on, or you could submit written testimony via email, bcc@clackamas.us. There are several commissioners that need to go to meetings, so we're going to just try to get through as many as we can. We do want to hear from you. I'm sorry that we wasted time at the beginning of this session with technology issues, but people, you claim to be believers in God, the Bible, and Jesus. Next time, pray that we have good technology working. Okay, so, Rose, please continue.
Yeah, my name is Rose Brown Antunes, and I'm from St. John's. And I'm going to get super emotional because this place has done so much for me. In 2006, I came here and I lost my job, I lost my home, I lost my family. I'm from Warm Springs Reservation and I spent a lot of time in that jail. And I don't know if you have anybody that's like the black sheep they say in the family, but I was that, like the court person. When they'd see me sitting in front of them, they would be like, oh, this girl again, And my mom, I would steal her car, I would just run havoc in my house. And then I ended up in Northwest Bible Training Center in 2006. And, I could just roll my eyes and think, like, what is this Jesus going to do for me? But I went to Northwest Bible Training Center and fell head over heels in love with Jesus. And I remember I would be in the grocery aisle and someone didn't have a price tag on their bread, and I would be whipping my Bible out just because I wanted to read and know more about Jesus. And the words in the Bible began to change my heart. And that was 2006. I graduated in 2007. It is almost 2022, and I'm still sober, and I'm still serving God. I go back into Warm Springs, and I talk in the jails, and other people, because they heard my testimony in the jail, have gone through Northwest Bible Training Center, and they're still doing good. And I want to say, now I work at Providence. This is not like a testimony for how good I am, but for how good He is. I won the Emily Values and Action Award, and that's a big award that you can win in Providence. Providence paid for me to get a higher license, and now I'm on my path to becoming a nurse. And I went to Greece to help refugees, and I'm telling you, I started out as an addict and nobody wanted me around, and now God has taken that and multiplied it into something so humongous and so great. And when I see women and they're struggling, it's not me that's going to save them, but it's what God has done in my life. And you can encourage people, when Beth came up here and she talked about her 2 sons, my heart broke for her because I know how it is to have that in your life. And this place has changed my life so much. How good, I know that Beaver Creek does a lot of amazing things, but if you allow Northwest Bible Training Center to be in Beaver Creek, they would do so many other millions of things, because it took one person out of my neighborhood from Warm Springs, Oregon, on a reservation. And now, like, my mom is saved. There's people that are like coming to Jesus, and you take one person, you put it in a neighborhood, and you change so many people's lives. And so I'm just pleading with you to please be in our favor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Susan Campbell? You already did? Okay, thank you. Jerry Wagner. Please state your name, area of residence, and you have 3 minutes.
So my name is Jerry Wagner, and I'm a resident here at Oregon City. I also pastor a church here just down the road. I've been involved with Northwest Bible Training Center for over 20 years. I was with them when they were in the Portland location and in this location also. Selfishly, I was real excited when they got to move out this area, because we have such a need to be able to send a place for people to receive help. We have a community of pastors that support them financially, personally. I had my own son 20 years ago go through the program. He's now serving God and successful raising a family living in Canby. There's also just one other thing I wanted to point out, that a perspective I have is I knew him in the Portland area, and the residents were awesome then, but there's been a change since they've been out in Beaver Creek, and the only word I could describe is there's a sense of peace over them. Oftentimes they'll come in for a church service with us, and again, it's just an overwhelming peace that they have. When I go onto the property, I sense not only God's presence, but just real change happening in people's lives. And so just as a representative of the community, I just encourage and want them to be able to stay there.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. I appreciate your testimony. Tom Montano, I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly. Please come forward, sir, state your name, address, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is Tom Montano. I live at 14133 Passage Parkway in Oregon City. And I teach at the Northwest Bible Training Center once a week, sometimes more than that when I get the opportunity. I just want to explain about how I see some men come in, and it's been only men so far, but I know that they can help women as well. But I see men come in on their first day, and they can't pay attention. Their head is almost, and sometimes is, down on the table. It's at the first time that I saw that, it was kind of took me aback. But that, as I see it in a consistent way, and men come in and they're just, at the first day they're like this. But the first guy that I saw do that is now out of the process and has a job. And I see that, I watch their transition from that point, how they come in, how the next week and the next week and the next week, and it's just about 4 to 5 weeks they're coherent, and they're listening, and they're paying attention, and they're asking questions, and they get it. They just get it. And so what my perspective of this is that this little 7-acre piece is like the mustard seed in the Bible in Matthew 13, 31, and 32. It's like the mustard seed. It's the smallest of seeds. But what happens to these folks that come in, most of the staff, I'm going to make sure, most of the staff right now, I have watched them go into being part of the staff. And I see that there's other people that have come in and gone out, and they're out evangelizing now and bringing people in, just like you heard the last lady talk about. They're out evangelizing. So this isn't a rural, urban, even statewide deal here. This is a global thing that's happening. There will be people coming out of this little 7-acre parcel. And I was a farmer for 8 years, and I know that's when my faith started to grow, as I started farming, and I started seeing the miracle of life happen every day. And that's what I think is happening here at Northwest Bible Training Center, and the fact that it is on a farm. So
thank you very much for your testimony. Up next is Zeth Wilson. On deck is Dustin Allen. We might get through these. And then the final person is James Thwing. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Zeth Nelson, state your name, your area of residence, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is Zeth Nelson. I live at Northwest Bible Training Center. I'm the current overseer of the program, which means I handle most of the residents' businesses like doctor's appointments, just pretty much the day-to-day operations with the residents. My testimony is I've battled drug addiction for a long time, and I've lived there for 2 years now, and it changed my life for the better. I can be productive in society. I work at the local Albertsons because we do not get paid. But the exceptional land use that we're looking for right now it's huge because, like Tom just said, it's a 7-acre piece of land that can change America for a better. Like the burden that we talked about and that we supposedly could not find is not with us moving to a different property. The burden will not burden, I don't think us, I think it will burden more Clackamas County, more the state of Oregon as a whole. Because if we're not allowed to do what we're doing to save, people's lives, because we save one person's life at a time. I think that urbanization from the homelessness and the drug addiction in Portland will be in Clackamas County before you know it. There'll be tents set up all over the place. And we're that solution. I grew a 100-pound pumpkin in the farm, and I couldn't have done that if we didn't have exclusive farm land because it wouldn't have the soil to do it. We did another testimony a couple weeks ago and we brought up veterans. There's a veteran there right now, and he couldn't find help. There's VAs and everything like that, but he couldn't find a place to go. He didn't know how to. Sorry if I get emotional, but he's probably one of my favorite residents. I'm not saying I have favorites because they're all great, but he didn't have the capability to find help, and God put him, and we just did the Pledge of Allegiance, one nation under God. And this land use exception, all the criteria of the urbanization or the burden that it would put not only on us, but on Oregon and on Clackamas County, without having us is way more than the 7 acres of land that would just change everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nelson. Up next, Dustin Allen, and then James Thwing. Please be ready to testify. State your name, address, and you have 3 minutes.
My name's Dustin Allen. I live in Molalla, Oregon, and my dad is a resident up there. His name's Rob Allen. He's the 65-year-old gentleman that he spoke about, and my dad would have been homeless. He was a farrier has been for almost 50 years, and has been very successful in that business and creating a great persona in the community, and he's very well respected and loved. I've recently moved back to take over his business and communicating with his customers, and they're all just so grateful that there's somewhere in the rural community that he could go, because he's grown up he lived in Beaver Creek, he's lived in Molalla for over 20 years, and he wouldn't have gone to the city. When I found him, he was sleeping in his truck. He hadn't taken his boots off in 6 weeks. And I convinced him that there's a place in Beaver Creek, and he said he'd go. He would have died. This place saved his life. And I think there's so many more people in the rural community that are like my dad, that if they knew there was somewhere out in the country they could go, they would go get the help they need with their substance abuse. I think a lot of people, they don't because they're scared to go to the city, because of the temptation, because of the traffic, because of the lights, because of the noise. And they're able to be peaceful on this piece of 7 acres. And they do farm the land. They take care of the goats, the chickens, the greenhouses. And we knew when we pulled down the driveway that we found somewhere that my dad could get the help he needs. And now he's doing so much better. He's walking again. He couldn't walk when he got there. The guys, when he got there, they were at the car. They had their arms around him, helping carry him in because he couldn't walk. And now he's walking. He cooks in the kitchen. And he was a contributing member of society for his entire life until he lost the battle with alcohol. And now he's going to be able to come back to Clackamas County and be a contributing member of Clackamas County again because of what this place in Beaver Creek is doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. James Thwing, please come forward. Please state your name, area of residence, and you have 3 minutes. And then, commissioners, I'm going to go right to the script.
Well, good morning. My name is Jim Twing, and I am from Lake Oswego, Oregon. I have been a member of the Oregon State Bar since 1973. I'm a retired lieutenant colonel from the United States Army, and for the last 26 years, I have been the mission director and the business administrator of Lake Bible Church, which is located in also Lake Oswego. It is in that capacity that I have come to know Northwest Bible Training Center, because it is in fact a ministry of our church and has been a ministry since 1996. It was recommended to be such by Ron Post, who was at that time the founder of Northwest Medical Teams, which has become now Medical Teams International. So we've had 26 years to take a look at Northwest Bible Training Center, and I personally have been a Bible instructor there for 10 years. So I know the people there. I know the graduates, many of which you have seen here today. There is in the legislative history of exclusive farm use only zoning and land use policy in Oregon here, an amazing history of politicians and laymen who took a look at the way the land was being governed here in Oregon and came to the conclusion there needed to be a reservation for sure for farmland. That's pretty obvious. But it wasn't a lockstep view to it. In fact, if you look at the legislative history and actually read the language of the people being used at that time, you see that there was real tremendous consideration of all the possibilities that would arise as a result of establishing exclusive zoning for farming. There's plenty of leverage there for you to make a decision today, it seems to me, that this should be an exception. First of all, the property itself is not really farm use property. It's 7.7 acres. That's about the size of the property of our own church. It's never going to be used to interfere with other lands there. The principle of Northwest Bible Training Center is Jesus Christ. And we are there to honor God. We're not there for any other purpose. And I can guarantee you this as an eyewitness. For the years that I have been there as an instructor of the Bible particularly, I have seen lives literally, physically, spiritually transformed. And when you have something like that, folks, you have nothing to fear. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We went through the cards, very good. Mary, Zoom is continuing not to work, is that correct?
I do have it up, Chair. I only have 5 participants. There were people up earlier who've come off.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to entertain a motion to continue this hearing. Commissioners, you have language in your script to do that. Commissioners have not had time to opine on this because I felt it was most important, since you all showed up, to be able to testify on this issue. On the January 26th date, which has been set for a continuance on this, providing it passes the board today, we will allow from testimony for the folks on Zoom who did not get an opportunity to do so. One gentleman who left for work, Ed Grant, he can come back. I'm also going to allow for the applicants to present anything they may have forgotten at that time. To shore up the application, applicants will have 5 minutes at the next hearing to make their case. Les Poole, I cut you off when you were talking about Goal 14, thinking that your attorney was going to address that. Your attorney chose to go the Arluba route. So if you want to make a very clear presentation succinctly on your argument on Goal 14, you can do it at that time. I want to appreciate all the hard work that staff has gone through on this presentation. They have worked diligently. They have not taken a position, yay or nay, on this. They are doing their very best to accommodate the applicants while meeting the state law that we are bound by. So with that in mind, Commissioner Scholl, do you have a motion?
Yes. I move we continue this matter until January 26, 2022 at 10 a.m. for deliberation and decision only.
Yeah, I'm just going to amend that. We are going to also amend it to say that we can have continued testimony and more staff input and then commissioners' comments. Is that okay, commissioners?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Don't know if you see my light.
Oh, no, I didn't see it,
That's
sorry.
okay. So question for Nate, is the record, will it remain open during this time?
My light's on too, so I didn't know. we must be having some issues there as well. So no, I was hoping we could get some clarity on that because the way that the motion in the script is written was for deliberation decision only. There's a motion now on the floor to amend that to allow, I presume what you had articulated earlier, the applicant 5 minutes, those that didn't have the opportunity to testify here. So it would be those, testifying for the first time, an opportunity to do so. With regards to written materials, let's get some clarity on that because is it the intent that you would like to accept written testimony?
Yes.
Okay.
If
So
we're going to leave the record open, I would think anybody who wants to submit more written testimony can have the opportunity to do that. I think that is fair. I'm not going to say it's going to sway any decision or what we're going to have, but I want to make sure that the applicants, proponents, and opponents have an opportunity to weigh in on this.
And that's fine. I just want to make sure that the expectation is clear, and it sounds like it is. And so the motion then, if I could just make sure I understand and everybody else is clear, is that the hearing will be continued until January 26th, 2021 at 10 a.m. to allow the applicant and those that didn't have an opportunity to testify today an opportunity to present oral testimony, and the record will be left open until that time for anybody to submit written testimony. Correct?
Yes.
2022. I'm already doing it, yeah.
Wow.
Okay.
Just a
Yes, we
question
have
for-
not had a second on the motion yet.
Oh, go ahead.
Would you like to do that?
Sure.
Thank you.
I'll
Commissioner,
second it.
there's a motion for a continuance for Commissioner Stoll and second by Commissioner Fisher. I have to kind of go through the rules.
Yeah, that's
You
good.
have the floor, Commissioner Fisher.
Thank you, and I know the time is short, but I just want to, because we've gotten a lot of information. Appreciated staff's presentation. I have been trying to match what they say the requirements are with what the application materials are, and I can see why there is, why the staff made the recommendation that they did. I'm just wondering, within this next couple weeks, is it possible for more information to be provided, which can give us more information, especially on the agricultural uses? That's something that I'm hearing in testimony. It's not mentioned in much detail in the application. I, right now, don't have a good sense of that. That's kind of a big deal for me when I look at how much farmland we're losing, like every minute in this country. And we even have a goal right here to promote agricultural uses in our priorities. So I just need more of that. And I don't know if that's possible to get more information or to ask that the information for the application be, I love all the emotional stuff, but quite frankly, we have to follow the law. And there are certain elements that go boom, 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 and we need those answered. And as the decision makers, I don't feel like the information that we have received and that's in our packet and in our testimony hits those points at this moment effectively.
And we
so-
also have another commissioner who's absent today.
Yes.
Who will want to weigh on this, I'm sure.
Yeah, so Nate, can we get more information that can help us? Or is the application, is that mostly what we have
No,
to go on it? Or is it the entirety of the record? And can they either amend or submit additional information?
Well, the way that the motion currently stands is that anybody can submit any testimony. And so it sounds like you are trying to articulate some questions and concerns that you may have. And so I would, encourage the applicant to take that to heart and to supplement their materials accordingly. Staff has all highlighted in their presentation some questions that they have and some holes, if you will, in their application. I raised some issues, on RLUIPA, and we're happy to talk those through with anybody. But this would be a time to supplement the record, and we can absolutely do that. I'll just mention one more thing. If the hearing is on the 26th, folks that are submitting written materials into the record will want to have that to us by the 19th. to ensure that it gets before the board in their packets. Doesn't mean that you can't show up with written materials to the hearing, but if you want the board to be able to read that and review that and to consider that prior to the January 26th hearing, we have to have that the week before, just so we can do our notice and make sure it's available to everybody.
Thank you, Nate. Commissioner Savas, you're up.
Yeah, you have a lot of compelling testimony here today. I appreciate that. Legal counsel for the applicant, I followed your arguments under our LUPA very clearly, but I was surprised, I guess positively I'll say, that you tried to conform some of that into the land use piece, which I thought was interesting. So was that the new information that you referenced earlier?
Well, there's a couple prongs, if I'm following your question. There's a couple prongs under RLUIPA. One is that the government can't substantially burden through the imposition of regulation. The other is if the government is discriminating or not treating secular and non-secular uses on equal terms, either in the as-applied functioning of the regulations. That's another basis on which we could violate RLUIPA. And so our memo in the record focuses on substantial burden because, again, those were our interpretation of what the applicant was arguing. We can take a look at the equal terms prong of RLUIPA, and if you have questions about that, I'd be happy to answer it. My point was just that this was, we didn't focus on that in our materials because we weren't aware that that was the basis on which they were arguing.
From up in the coming days and weeks here, I'll need a little bit more thought.
Commissioners, I'm really going to ask you to be brief.
That's all I have.
Yeah, I know you are. Commissioner Fisher, can you be very brief?
Yeah, I can. So Nate, when we work with the applicants, do we give them the questions that they're supposed to answer in their application? Or do we just take their application and then we tell them what we don't like about it?
Well, it's all based on the criteria, right? And I can't speak to exactly how much involvement they had, but that's typical, yeah.
I'm happy to quickly touch on that. We had multiple communications before even an application was submitted. We have pre-application conference, and that's the intent of that conference, is to go over different land use pathways, the submittal criteria, the approval criteria. So all that was made as clear as it could be considering statute. Then the application was also incompleted formally with a letter explaining all of the requirements. What we have is kind of their best effort to address all of the
Okay, that's
criteria.
great. Thank you so much.
Okay, applicants, you've been given a gift. You've heard from staff, your application is incomplete. I've given a gift, and you can address Goal 14. Commissioner Savas has said, interesting argument about our LUBA relating to land use. I suggest you use this time wisely until now to the 26th. Also, sometimes it's easier for commissioners if you submit your questions and your testimony in writing ahead of time. Then we have time to read it, contemplate, and educate ourselves on what we need to do. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate all this going on, and this meeting is adjourned.
Can we get a vote? I'm sorry, we had motion on the floor.
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to vote. Holy cow, I'm such in a hurry to get out of here. The motion is on the table, and it has been seconded.
Yes.
May we vote?
Yes, Commissioner Fisher.
Aye.
Commissioner Schull.
Aye.
Commissioner Savas.
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 4-0. One of our commissioners is absent today, and I'm sure she has important information to weigh in on. Thank you, everybody, for your patience and all of the baubles, including mine today, and this meeting is adjourned.